Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Tom Woods Show. It's episode 2539, and our old friend Auron MacIntyre of the Auron MacIntyre Show is back with us. As I've told you, you got to read his book, The Total State. And it's how liberal democracies become tyrannies?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Fantastic book, as I told you multiple times. And he doesn't know this yet, but he may be coming to suspect it, that he's becoming my I just need to vent kind of guy, and I just bring him on, and that's precisely what we do. So, but I always want not to dominate the show. I want to hear from somebody else. I want to learn from somebody else, get other people's perspectives. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Auron, I want to start, if I may, with something that's not, well, I guess in very, very indirectly, it's ripped from the headlines, but it's something a little bit more personal about you and about what you used to do for a living, because there's a lot that's very revealing about this. You were writing about it the other day on what I'm persistent calling Twitter, and I hope Elon Musk has some kind of an epiphany about that. But anyway, it has to do with your former occupation. Now, what was that occupation? Where did you carry it out, and how long did you do it?
I was a public school teacher down in Florida, collectively about 5 years. I came out of college with a political science degree, but there's not a lot of jobs in political theory. So I ended up becoming a state employee, the graveyard of all great, all great bachelors of arts. And so I ended up teaching for a year or two, then worked in politics and came back to it at the end. It's actually what I was doing before I ended up working at the Blaze. So right up to the day I signed up at the Blaze, I was still teaching public high school.
Okay. Do you still live where you lived when you were a teacher, or have you moved?
No, I do. Yeah, I am in the area where I taught.
Okay. So what grade level are we talking about?
I taught both middle and high school, mostly mostly 10th and 11th grade. But I did spend a couple years in a middle school.
Okay. So your background is in political science. So what did you teach?
I taught history and civics.
Okay. All right. So, what was the experience like, and why aren't you doing it anymore?
Well, I think by nature, I do have the disposition of a teacher. I enjoy helping people understand things. That's a lot of what I feel like I do now. It's one of the reasons that people enjoy watching my content is I try to take things that are complex and boil them down to something that the average person can kind of put in place for them in the real world. And so I enjoy the act of teaching, but it was certainly a struggle. I ended up in a Title I school in Florida, for those who are unfamiliar. These are the schools where the families are all incredibly low in the socioeconomic ladder. So they usually can't provide supplies for themselves and these type of things. So a Title I school is one that's getting extra funds to basically fill in for the poverty of the parents when it comes to just basic things like getting the kids pencils and paper, those kind of things. And it was really the kind of experience you'd expect. There are plenty of great students there. There are plenty of bright students. There are plenty of teachers that were trying to do the right thing. But overall, you really had a system, even in Florida, which is supposed to be, one of the most based states in the country now, where ultimately it was very clear a progressive agenda dominates everything. It's everything you expected. I sat through meetings where we were told we weren't allowed to let parents know if their children were attempting to transition. So stuff like that. That was my first step out the door when I sat through. Luckily, that never came to my. I never had to make that decision between my employment and that. But that was certainly the fact that could even become an issue was something that set me down the trail of I can't do this anymore. But the most striking thing was really the way that politics played out in the building. I worked in a majority minority school. And so the vast majority, I'd say 75 to 80% of the student body was either Black or Hispanic in some mixture. And the politics there were very clear. You weren't allowed to actually suspend or expel students because that they would always invariably be minority students. When 80% of your student body is minority, then the vast majority of people you're going to suspend are going to be minority students. And that made our district's numbers go up quite precipitously. And so they had effectively banned the process of discipline inside our school. And that has all the effects that you would expect. There's constant violence, fights breaking out on a regular basis because students knew there was really no penalty for this. At most, they had this failed system of counseling that came out of the prison system of all places, restorative justice. And the idea of restorative justice is you go to the person you wronged and you make amends, and that's in lieu of any normal type of punishment. Of course, all of the students who were acting horribly or fighting knew that all that really meant is they could sit in a room with a person they were bullying, intimidate them a little more while pretending to say, I'm sorry, and then go back to exactly what they were doing. So it pretty much yielded the environment you'd expect.
So you, in effect, no doubt were in situations where you would have, in an ideal world, said to the administration, this student and this student make the environment impossible and some disciplinary action needs to be taken, and you just decided you were discouraged from doing that, or there was no point in doing that?
Yeah, it goes beyond in an ideal world. Just in a sane world, we're not talking about kids who were just, they speak out a lot in class or they move around too much. It's not that type of disruption. It's like kids who hurl desks across the room, kids who leap across a desk to tackle another child and strangle them. These are the kind of things that happened in classrooms all the time. And you were encouraged to downgrade them on the referral system to make sure that they didn't actually end up getting expelled. And of course, the students knew that unless you had a really serious violent altercation, you could get away with pretty much anything and return to the classroom on a regular basis. And of course, the parents we had didn't help. I literally had many parents who had blocked the school's number because they got called so often by teachers that they just blocked the school so that they didn't have to hear about their kids' disobedience anymore. So it's not like you can call the parents and appeal to some kind of authority. They literally are just shoving their kid into the school so they can do whatever they want for the rest of the day, and they don't care what kind of criminal behavior they're up to. And things got so bad in my school that eventually we ended up with several prison riot-style fights, both in the cafeteria and in it's one of those 3-story schools with the open floor plan so you could see all the way down to the bottom on the staircase. And the videos came in were just guys standing on the 3rd floor staircase watching the entire floor just swirl like there was some like a mosh pit at a concert, but everyone's getting punched constantly. And after that happened, they finally they fired the principal, who was only following the policies of the district when he had specifically been told to do. They fired the principal, brought in a new principal. For 6 months, that principal was allowed to actually suspend students no matter what their race was. And so we actually had a safe environment where kids learned for a whole 6 months. But eventually, the suspensions started stacking up. We were outpacing the rest of the district by almost, I think it's like 8-1 or 10-1 on a regular basis. And, all of them minority students because of the demographic nature of the school. And so the district panicked. They went ahead and took the entire disciplinary system out of the hands of the teachers. The teachers couldn't even put referrals in anymore. It all had to go through the administration so the administration could carefully manage what actually got escalated into a referral. And basically everything went back to the way that it was.
I had a college professor who was one of these New Deal Democrats who couldn't be a Democrat anymore because he thought the Democrats had just gone nuts. And this was in the early 1990s. So I'm pretty sure if he were alive today, he would still not be a Democrat. But he wrote, this is Stefan Thernstrom, and he wrote a series of books on the subject of race. He was the editor of the Harvard Encyclopedia of American Ethnic Groups. He was friends with Thomas Sowell. So I was lucky to have him because that was about the sanest person you were going to run into on campus. But in one of his books, so he has a book called No Excuses, Closing the Racial Gap in Learning, and another book called America in Black and White. And one of the many points he makes is that complaints about disruptive behavior among Black students and let's say disciplinary action were more likely to be taken by Black than white teachers. So the complaint that, well, this is racist white teachers who arbitrarily want to give a hard time to black students who I am quite sure most white and black teachers just want to get through the day. And they're really not looking to start anything, obviously. He said that, but it was more likely to be the black teachers who said something. So there goes that theory.
They're the only ones that feel like they can in a lot of situations. There's just an undeniable fact, and you can pick your favorite explanation here. I'm not here to have any. Excuse me. I'm not here to convert anyone to any understanding of the human condition. But the raw facts are that black students regularly are involved in more disciplinary infractions and violent confrontations than students of other ethnic backgrounds. And that's just the fact. Now, again, you can have your favorite explanation for that, but as long as the thing you're trying to do is bury that fact, as long as you're trying to alter discipline around that fact, you're trying to change the way that you manage behavior because of that fact, to hide that fact, you're always going to produce a more dangerous school environment. That's all there is to it. I don't care why someone commits more crimes. I care if crimes are committed. And if you ignore imposing the law because you don't like the results demographically of who the law falls on, then all of society breaks down. We're seeing this across many domains when it comes to especially progressive, jurisdictions. And the same is true in school, right? There's a set of rules. If everyone can follow the rules, then you can have a safe learning environment. If everyone can't follow the rules, then you're going to be in danger. And if you have a separate set of standards, or you're specifically altering the standards because there's a demographic group that consistently fails to follow those rules, then you're gonna have a huge problem. I don't think there's anything about the rules that make it impossible for any group to follow them, and so there's simply no reason. And many of the people who are, of course, most devastated by this inability to enforce the rules are the very populations that progressives pretend, of course, to care about. The education gets worse in minority-majority schools when no minorities can have discipline. In the same reason that it would become worse in a all-white or all-Asian school if they could not have discipline, because any school with a lack of discipline will reliably produce the same results. Now, there are far more problems with the public school system, as both you and I know, and would go on, ad nauseum. So to be clear, there's lots of problems with many of the rules in a public school, what's being taught in the public school. I'm not here to say that the key to fixing all of this is making sure everyone conforms to the state's understanding of how people should behave or should be educated. But I'm simply saying that since we have these institutions, and since these institutions are educating the majority of people, if they have this separate set of standards, or if they are radically altering the standards for everyone based on trying to hide a demographic reality, then we're going to end up with this same result on a regular basis.
Hey, everybody. My wife helps me look after my health, particularly when from time to time my schedule gets stressful. She says she wants me to be around as long as possible, and I, of course, appreciate that. Well, absolutely true story. She started handing me Super Beets Heart Chews and said I should have one a day. She will attest to this on social media. So every day she'd hand me one, and every day I'd consume it. They're individually wrapped, so they're super convenient. Then I looked at the package and realized these people are my newest sponsor. Well, so how about that? Super Beets Heart Chews offer a convenient, delicious, plant-based way to support healthy blood pressure and circulation. You can enjoy a heart-healthy boost without relying on stimulants. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the unique antioxidant compound in Super Beets is clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than a healthy lifestyle alone. So in addition to my gym regimen and my diet, it's nice to know I'm doing something good for myself every day. They're super easy and convenient. Sometimes my wife will hand me one as I'm headed out the door. And what's more, they give you heart-healthy energy without the crash. Remember, no stimulants and no artificial sweeteners or colors. Double your potential with Super Beets Heart Chews. Get a free 30-day supply of Super Beets Heart Chews on all bundles and 15% off your first order by going to getsuperbeets.com and using code WOODS. That's getsuperbeets.com, code WOODS. And it starts at the earliest ages. It doesn't start in middle school and high school, because sometimes the what they try to say something like, white supremacy forges them into this, or like whatever it is, or expectations, but it's like kindergarten too, and even before then. So, and again, it's it's for whatever reason, it's the black teachers who are telling the administration that this is what's happening. Now, a lot of people will look at bad schools and not want to tell the story of what's actually happening within the walls. They just think that maybe they're not using the right educational methods, or they don't have the most up-to-date books, or whatever. But that's not really the issue. I have a friend from graduate school. She was a Korean-American student and very idealistic. You can already see where this is going. She was from California, but we went to graduate school in New York, and she decided that upon graduation, she was going to teach in a public school, and a really, really run-down one, let's say, with a lot of challenges. But that was what she was going to do because she was going to make a difference. One person can make a difference. Within a year, she just moved back to California. And this is somebody who that was her whole life. That was what she wanted to do. And the abuse she took was so overwhelming and demoralizing that she decided, why am I subjecting myself to this? And she left. So yeah, it's not a money problem.
Yeah, there's this, if you're in the educational system at all, that there's an entire industry based on training and methods. And there's a large amount of money that goes into people developing whatever new, Kagan or whatever new disciplinary educational strategies are going to do everything. And these things are always promised to fix the problem specifically. Now, of course, the most important problem they can fix is the gap between minority students, and other populations. That's supposed to be the thing they're always selling. And what we find over and over again is that these methods are failures. That actually the oldest methods, things like direct instruction, are actually the most effective methods. But we can't sell new plans if we just go back to the methods that worked in the 1950s, right? Like that there's no new book to sell, there's no new program, no new training to go through. All those dollars dry up, all of that industry dries up. And so there's just this constant promise where we're chasing something that we can never quite achieve, which is the total equality of all peoples across all demographic groups in every educational situation. And whether people, say this consciously or not, that's what they actually expect, right? This is the blank slate theory that the conservatives buy into, people on the right sometimes buy into, just as often as people on the left do, which is everyone is basically more or less, starting in the same place. And once you have the right principles, you have the right system, you have the right ideas, then everyone can just catch up. And especially this idea of, education is the silver bullet, the great equalizer. If everybody can just get the same education, then we'll all end up in the same place. That's, again, most conservatives wouldn't say we'll end up in the same place out loud, but that's ultimately what they believe, or otherwise a lot of their other beliefs kind of fall apart. And so we end up in the scenario where we're constantly chasing this dragon, where there's, once we finally get this one educational method unlocked, once we pour enough money into everything, once we get the right, technology in the classroom, that will solve all of our issues. But it never does. And the price of educating students always goes up, and the quality of education always goes down. And there's never a question asked about why those things are, inversely correlated.
I did a little poking around the other day. I was curious, how much do various states spend on one student over the course of a K through 12 career? So that's 13 years. And I know New York is always an outlier, but I had to check. I knew New York would be the highest. And it's $434,000 to educate one student over the course of this system. And it seems to me like if we had another system where some entity other than the state was educating them, and the results were this dismal, that you run into these students and they don't know anything about anything. And if they do know something, it's some easily debunked platitude. Like that's it. And that's what you get for $434,000. These people would be up in arms about it. But because it's this system and there are a lot of people on the gravy train, the answer is we haven't got enough money. It's not that you haven't got enough money. It seems to me that what you would want to do if you were, let's say, black and middle class. Now, so you might say, if you reach the middle class, I'm leaving this dysfunction behind. This is not my problem, and I am not going to try to fix it. I can understand that, but at the very least, you would want to have the message be, look, we're not going to use poverty as an excuse here, because there are a lot of poor people who don't act like this. So we're not going to use poverty as an excuse. We should hold ourselves to a higher standard. The white students act like X, then we're going to act like X squared, okay? And we're going to do that because we have dignity, and because that way we'll get a reputation for being the kind of people want to employ and spend time with. And so it's very, very important that when you observe your own behavior, you do so realizing that it's not just you're reflecting on, you reflect on all of us. So we're really going to need to come together and get our act together and knock this off and quit making excuses for not being able to conform. In some cases, it's just the most baseline expectations of people. And yet nobody says that. Yes, I know you can email me that there's some odd pastor in the middle of nowhere who tries to say this, but, Al Sharpton doesn't really say it. Maybe from time to time behind closed doors he will. But then when the doors are open, it's all, of course we have these problems. The schools aren't well funded enough. But you just don't. I mean, I guess there's no interest in that. There's no incentive for anybody to spread a message like that, because spreading the opposite message gets resources and attention and sympathy.
There are, to be fair, guys like Jason Whitlock or Delano Squires, who are my co-workers at the Blaze, who do have exactly that message. But the problem is really that you are in this moment where it's difficult. There used to be, America used to be a Anglo-Protestant nation with other minority groups who are joining into that. And obviously when it comes to African Americans, that's a very different scenario, because most of their ancestors did not choose to join into that society. But either way, it's a significant group that had a specific bargaining place in society. And so when we kind of knew the majority of the society and what that culture was going to be and what people were working with, then there was a specific negotiation that could come along. And there was a cohesive culture where many people inside the African American community said exactly what you're saying, right? We need to show that we can participate and be a part of. We can go ahead and integrate in. We can assimilate in a very real way. And because that community had a very tight, unfortunately in many cases forced, but very tight idea of identity, a cohesive idea of identity, they could measure what kind of expectations they were placing up and what they were measuring them against. When you end up in this multicultural society, there's nothing to conform to, right? We just get this boogeyman word of whiteness or whatever, right? This is the idea, is that everyone's having to conform to whiteness. Well, no, that's just the majority culture of a nation, which is what anyone has to assimilate to if they actually want to join into a nation. This is just the way that people throughout history who were from one culture and wanted to join another culture had to live. That's what they had to be. But when you create a multicultural nation, there's no idea to conform to. There's no measure against. And then your community has a difficult time understanding where they would assimilate to if they're going to assimilate to anything. And so I think you're in this scenario where most groups outside of, kind of the original majority white ethnicity of the United States, that those other groups are now looking around saying, well, there is no American culture. There is no majority culture to look at. And so we can just make our own, or we can be our own, or there's no reason to conform to any of this because, it's so heavily fractured. When I used to teach, one of the most terrifying things was whenever I would have like a fun quiz, like something to break things up, to give the kids a minute to do something different. The one that they always wanted to do, the game they always wanted to play, was spot the brand names, like Pizza Hut or Taco Bell or Pepsi, because those are the things that they all knew. They might be from Guatemala, they might be from Haiti, they might be from Tennessee, but the one thing they all knew was what Starbucks logos look like. That was the only shared culture. That was the only shared signifiers that they had together. And that makes it very difficult for any one culture to say, oh, well, we're going to meet a minimum threshold of who? Whose threshold? What threshold? Well, when you don't have a unified culture, you don't have that option.
Did the other faculty grumble among themselves about conditions at the school?
Oh, most certainly. And the funniest thing about the funniest thing about this was, I was keeping my power level turned down, as one might imagine, in this scenario. And so a lot of teachers are just talking to you as if you're a progressive. They just assume every teacher they run into is a progressive. And so they'll be having these very left-wing conversations with you, telling all the left-wing things they believe. And then they'll get to the actual nature of, say, the disciplinary problems or the grading problems inside the school. And they all knew what they were. And they would say it explicitly, like, oh, well, we can't suspend kids because of their race. And that's what makes it impossible to teach anyone here. They'll say that out loud without hesitation, as long as they think everyone is on side, right? Like, we're among friends, so we could admit the issue there. The school I was teaching at even had a plan. They wanted, they used to be this high letter in Florida. We have like the A schools, and they go down to the failing schools, give them the grades so they can figure out like bonuses and things that they're getting. And the school used to be an A school, but the school was now like a C- school. And they were trying to figure out how they were going to change that. And the new principal, who again, very progressive, said, oh, well, there's no way we can change it with our current demographics. So her plan was to turn the school into a magnet to attract other demographics from across the county that would increase the school, not to better the education of the school, not to better the conditions, not to change the way you did things, to raise the level up. Her plan was literally to just import new students in a very U.S. government. We'll just import new citizens. We don't like our current outcomes. Well, it is the same thing. So yeah, they were aware of the problems. They were aware of the limitations. They were even aware of the politics that kept actual education from taking place. But they just valued their progressivism above any of the actual solutions.
That very much reminds me of being in graduate school. And in graduate school, there were, in the history department, there were a handful of people who would get full funding. So the whole tuition covered, a stipend, and everything else. But this was at a time when the university was not in the financial shape it is now. So as I say, there were only a handful of people who got this. And everybody around me in that department was a quote-unquote progressive. Absolutely everybody. You could predict every single opinion coming out of their mouths. I mean, I already knew what they thought about everything. But as you say, because they assumed we all thought the same way, they would grumble about, I didn't get a single dime as a package from the university, but I'm sitting in class, these small seminars, with people who obviously got them as a racial spoil system. We all know that. Everybody knows that. And they're not doing the work. They have nothing to say. And I don't think any of them finished the program. That's where the money went. The money didn't go to these, and a lot of them were just, kids who came from very humble backgrounds, just trying to scrape enough together to make this program work. And so they were very unhappy, but this never translated into anything. This is, I guess that's it's an unchangeable feature of the world. It's not anything that you can do anything about. Did anybody, I don't know what years we're talking about. What was the earliest year that you were teaching?
It would have been right out of college, so now I can prove I'm an old man. I guess it would have been 2004.
Okay, so this is much too early for anybody to be coming to you and saying my pronouns are X and Y?
Well, until, again, I went back into teaching, so yeah. I also taught just like 2 years ago. So no, that wouldn't have been too early. Like when I started teaching, yes, it would have been far too early.
But did anyone actually do it?
I'm sorry?
Did anybody actually do it?
Oh, I refused. Again, luckily, I was not in a scenario where my job was placed on the line. But no, I would not refer to anyone by other pronouns.
But did they ask you to?
No, I had one student who very obviously was attempting to signal a transition, but did not demand pronoun usage. As long as you stuck with the first name, you were okay, I guess, most of the time.
I mean, I used to teach for a while too, but I that was only up until 2006. And then I look back and I think, if it were today, I don't know if I could endure all the craziness. So one of my friends says, well, what I've done is I just don't use pronouns. I just use the name. I don't use pronouns. And that solves it for me.
That's about as close as you can get. I mean, the only other solution is to get out. And the good news is the good news is here in Florida that is becoming more of a real thing. Florida has passed the funding follows the student, not the system model. And so now in Florida, you can go ahead and get a waiver for homeschooling or for private schooling for any reason. It's not needs based. You can, anyone can do this. And so we are actually seeing a lot of public schools in Florida talk about closing. They just don't need as many of their campuses because so many students are homeschooling or private schooling. And that really started, of course, with the COVID exodus. A lot of parents recognized what was actually being taught to their kids or not being taught to their kids when they had started having the classes in the home with the parent, with the teacher on remote. A lot of people started making that transition, and now that it's in law, more and more people can make that step. So,
folks, we can complain all we want about big tech, but nothing changes until we do. And the fact is, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Zoom, you name it, they think your private data is their playground for their advertising networks and AI systems. Well, one way you can avoid all those things is just by not using the quote-unquote free tools big tech wants you to use. Federated Computer, on the other hand, offers a full replacement for Google, Microsoft Office 365, Slack, Zoom, all the tools of big tech, but designed for people who care about privacy, don't want to be treated like cattle, and want a great price. Everything's encrypted end-to-end, fully backed up daily. And we're talking about private email, file storage, group chat, WordPress, all the applications you need for your business or team, all bundled into one easy monthly subscription that's 10 times less expensive than big tech offerings. You get unlimited users, fantastic personal customer support from real human beings, and the assurance that your data is your data, not big tech's. Visit www.federated.computer for your free 30-day trial. Use coupon code WOODS for 10% off your first 6 months. So how about that? A company that thinks its job is to provide you with services for a great price, rather than spying on you or shutting you up or manipulating you. So take your first step with other Happy Woods listeners toward digital freedom. Visit www.federated.computer today for your free 30-day trial and use coupon code WOODS for 10% off your first 6 months. Is it fair to describe you as belonging to the so-called dissident right? Would you say that's a fair statement?
Yeah, this is there's a lot of debate around this. I don't think the dissident right is a real thing. The dissident right is something that a lot of people kind of coined. You had the alt-right, right? And the alt-right was in the scenario where a lot of people like Paul Joseph Watson and Mike Cernovich and guys like this kind of called themselves a part of that. And then everything happened with Charlottesville, and that title fell just on, like the Richard Spencer types. Like they became the definition of that title. So everyone kind of bailed out of it. And people were just really looking for a title that says, I'm not part of the GOP establishment. I'm not a mainstream conservative. I don't think Sean Hannity is like the summit of all political wisdom. And so a lot of people started calling those on the internet that fell into that, the dissident right. But I really think, if anything, the dissident right is really just a collection of commentators who all are relatively dissatisfied with conservatism as it stands. But it's not a coherent movement, not even to the extent that, say, paleoconservatism was, because at least that had some intellectual tradition, some institutional attachment, if not a lot. There's some real life organization of political vision there, even if it was mainly just as a reaction to neoconservatism. As where the dissident right is almost entirely blogs and Twitter threads and YouTube videos.
Mm. Well, of course, even the very name indicates there's no overarching worldview. I mean, because you can be a dissident in all kinds of ways. So, but it does mean that you have, let's say, high level of dissatisfaction with what we have sometimes called conservatism Inc. That just that sticks in your craw. So, all right, but if we can say that, given that it is a very broad categorization, but that you would not feel uncomfortable being called that, how did you get there? What was your evolution of your thought? Is this kind of where you always sort of were, or did you start off more conventional and then you just couldn't take it anymore, or what?
No, I most certainly started out in the most normie talk radio conservative form of, mainstream GOP politics. I worked for a number of GOP politicians. I was, listening to a bunch of talk radio. I had pretty much all the, positions that you would think of as, I was never, I guess Ben Shapiro adjacent would be the right understanding. And then I saw what happened in 2020. And 2016 had already sent me down this path, seeing what happened with Trump and me being a reporter at the time and kind of looking at the way the news was spun and treated. I was like, I don't think this is working the way that I expected it to, but I hadn't completely jumped off the mainstream conservative train. I was still, spouting a lot of those points. And then when 2020 happened and I realized actually the Constitution just doesn't stop any of this stuff. Like government is not constrained in the way that I understand it. The separation of powers and the Bill of Rights, these are not some iron fast guarantee of liberty. That's what sent me down the road of reading guys like Curtis Yarvin. And Curtis Yarvin is great, but more importantly, he has a great reading list. And this led me to guys like Hans Hermann Hoppe and Bertrand de Juvenal and James Burnham and Vilfredo Pareto. And as I just started falling down all this well of kind of people who are more politically realist and often people who were a little more skeptical of many of the conventions that came with what many people will call classical liberalism, that kind of put me in the position that I am now.
Well, one of the problems with politics is very much in line with what the public choice people say. If I go to a store and buy something, I get exactly what I pay for. If I buy a TV, I go home, the thing in the box is a TV, and it does things that I expect it to do. But that is not what voting is like. I cast a vote for somebody, and I'm not even sure I'm going to get that product. But even if I do, I might not get the person I thought I was getting. So I open up the box, and instead it's somebody who basically is just going to let DEI go on, or it's somebody who wants a humble foreign policy, but then he sets the Middle East on fire. And so you don't get the same thing that you thought you were getting. And, it's not your private property or anything. So you don't really, a lot of people, unlike you and me, a lot of people don't bother really researching it. The way they research what's, a smartphone or a car or a TV compared to how they research somebody they're going to vote for, it's not even close. They don't spend any time with it at all. They will vote on the basis of the most frivolous and trivial reasons. And so it frustrates a lot of people. And I'm okay with people who say, politics makes me crazy and I don't want to be part of it. Okay, not going to force you. But I wouldn't say I ever really took that view because I have voted, and I don't think there's any moral problem with voting. Neither did Lysander Spooner, so I'm in good company. Neither did Murray Rothbard, so again, I think I'm in good company. But I do think that I have never heard a good answer when I talk to I'm just not going to be part of it people. Okay, so then what is your vision for how things get better? And I recognize there's only so much that can be done in politics. I get it. I'm absolutely on board with that. I understand. But I never have any real, here's how we get from A to B answer to that. Never. I've been waiting. I assume somebody has one. And then when I ask for it, I never really get it. So I've come to the conclusion at my, maybe not advanced age, but as I advance in age, that look, politics is its own thing. It's not like going into the marketplace and buying something. It's its own thing. With a TV, you can get exactly the TV you want. But in politics, you are not going to get exactly that TV. You might get a radio with really good reception, and that might be the best you can do. And the alternative is to get a poisonous snake in the box. And so unlike being on the market where it's either this TV or that TV, I have to make weird and disturbing choices. But if I don't make the choices, then my life gets worse. So that's more or less what's happened to me with that. I've come to the conclusion that I can't get everything I want. Whereas, as I say, if I go in the market, I can get the exact car I want. But in terms of politics, I will never get exactly what I want. So therefore, I have to think about, well, what are the things that are absolutely top-notch importance to me? Can I at least try to get a few of those? So is anything I'm saying, does any of that resonate with you? Because this is where I am now.
Yeah, there's a big problem with viewing politics as an economic structure, right? Like Homo economicus is just a failure. It's good at explaining certain behaviors in consumption and production, but it's very bad at understanding the human condition in its totality. And politics is this weird nexus of like economic interests, identity, religion, and just like a metaphysical animating spirit that people don't recognize, like all occurring at once. And when you try to boil it down to just like policy positions or economic benefits or these kind of things, it will fail you over and over again. And kind of everybody understood this until the Enlightenment, that leadership was actually a quasi-magical thing. You know, I'm reading Bertrand de Juvenel's Sovereignty. I'd only read On Power, I hadn't read Sovereignty. And he opens, explaining that basically all men who were ever in charge had to in some way invoke a divine right, because people had a problem understanding the authority without a connection to the metaphysical. It just didn't make sense. And it still doesn't. Like, people still operate under this thing. And we don't say it out loud. We don't understand it in that way, but it still operates in our background. Like, we're still deeply spiritual and religious creatures. And so, no matter how you feel about that particular software program, it continues to run. And so we end up in a scenario where people who go in and try to make highly rational decisions on a regular basis in politics lose, and they can't figure out why. I tell people all the time, political commentators need to spend more time at Walmart. They just don't spend enough time with the mass man. If you're sitting around telling me, people voted that way, that's their problem, it's their fault. No, it's not. Talk to the average person at Walmart. Talk to the person who's working 60 hours a week to try to keep food in the mouths of a couple kids and pay their rent and barely gets here. It's not like they have the IQ or the free time to develop a wide rational world in which they evaluate the policy of every person that they run into. They see 2 minutes of, television news a night, and that is their entire world. You cannot look at that person and be like, why have they not rationally evaluated every policy? And you cannot craft your political platform or your political presentation to appeal to anyone else, because that's the majority of people. That's where the votes are. So when people look at politicians and they're like, well, why are we always getting the Lincoln Douglas debates? Why are we always getting, the average political contestant going around and laying down beautiful, speeches about the way in which Cicero understood, civil responsibility? Well, that's because you are now working with the mass man, and because you've chosen the politics of the mass man, you consistently produce, candidates and strategies kind of along that line. And I think a lot of people are not factoring that in when they understand political reality.
So, is this one of the insights that you had over time, that you came to after a lot of thought?
Yeah, most assuredly. The first thing that really, a lot of people get red pilled on certain things. Mine was immigration. When I saw the immigration crisis in England, or rather Europe as a whole, back in the 2015s, 2016, and I recognized that everyone there didn't want this, and it kept happening anyway. I was like, well, that's not democracy. That's not what democracy is supposed to do. And then I started looking at the United States, and I said, okay, in the United States, is immigration popular? No, actually, if you look for many, many decades back, before just the most recent moment, even legal immigration was very unpopular, even among most Democrats. And so this idea that democracy is just what the informed person votes for, and that's actually what ends up being the popular opinion, and that's what ends up being the law. There's just nothing. There's no evidence that actually holds. And so, that's something that I slowly realized over time as I started critically evaluating the political realities. No, there's very little connection between kind of the rational interests of the voting public and what policies get instituted by the people that they have ostensibly voted for.
I'll just say very quickly that I heard years and years ago that was what got Julian Assange thinking, was that he saw all these protests about the war in Iraq, all these massive protests all over the world, and it didn't affect a thing. Made no difference on anything, on the way events played out. And now, obviously he's not, I wouldn't describe him as being on the right, but he did have a very important insight that we have a very, very good reason to believe that what's about to happen is against the will of a huge percentage of the world's population, and yet it's going to happen anyway. And that's just the way it is. And I remember, now I can't think of it. Was it Ralph Raico? But the normie idea of democracy is that you and I put together have twice the political power of David Rockefeller, but probably not. It's probably not how it works. All right, I'm going to let you go because we are more or less at sort of the sweet spot for the Tom Woods Show. But of course, you should follow Auron. I'm going to have his links in the show notes page, tomwoods.com/2539, also the video description. And check out, you can, when you consume the Auron MacIntyre show, this is, to put it mildly, this is not Sean Hannity. This, and I'll say, by the way, with regard to Sean Hannity, this was a long time ago, but I was on Fox News with him back when he had a show against a left liberal, Hannity and
Combs. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
And Combs was a much nicer guy. I mean, but not even close. I went on the Combs radio show immediately afterward in studio, and in between on the commercials, we had great banter. And I mean, he was a gentleman. Whereas Hannity was like the Iceman. Like there was no pre-show banter. He is here to do a job, and then he's going home to the Hamptons or wherever. But in the conversation, like he had never. I realize this is a kind of normie libertarian kind of point, but I was pointing out that the New Deal had not actually solved the problem of the Depression, and that in fact it had been counterproductive. Now that's a common, that's not what Newt Gingrich thinks, but that's a common-ish view. I mean, that was what the right at the time believed. Mm-hmm. He had never heard that argument before. Not one person had ever said that to him in his circle, and he had never read any book like that. This was an absolute epiphany to him, that was a possible way of interpreting the 1930s. This is the guy running things intellectually for us, for heaven's sake. You will not get that on the Auron MacIntyre show. So thanks so much, Auron, for your time, as always.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com, and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of the Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.